Hope in Hanoi, today on The World. I'm Marco Werman. President Obama is in Vietnam, and he's lifted a ban on selling weapons to America's former enemy. Eyeing China, this Vietnamese-American entrepreneur is pleased.
With the additional support that potentially America hopefully provide, that will balance power, especially within this region.
Plus, global aid groups get together to try and fix the entire humanitarian system.
It simply cannot cope with the massive crises that are far more protracted and far more expensive than any agency is able to cope with on its own.
And one man's fight against Kenya's corrupt politicians.
Pigs are selfish, and our members of parliament are like pigs. If you steal a lot of money, you go into politics, and you buy yourself immunity.
Those stories and more today here on The World. Good to have you with us on this Monday. I can imagine that for several generations to come, Vietnam will be symbolic of a war that becomes a quagmire, the bloodiest U.S. conflict since World War II, with an outcome that did not ring a victory. So a lot of very painful memories for many Americans. And yet President Obama is there right now, trying to project a very different sort of image, that of a relationship enjoying a new level of cooperation 41 years after the fall of Saigon. And that includes Obama's decision, announced today, to lift the embargo on U.S. companies selling arms to Vietnam.
People that have been paying attention to this issue have seen it coming.
The World's Patrick Nguyen covers Southeast Asia from his base in Bangkok.
We just didn't think that it was going to happen so soon. I mean, it's pretty obvious that the U.S. and Vietnam are moving closer and closer together. They've been making a lot of efforts to create a bridge and a friendship between the two militaries. And it's just sort of a surprise that this came today.
How significant is it that the U.S. can now sell arms to Vietnam and Vietnam can actually buy them?
Okay, so big picture, let's keep in mind, with very few exceptions, America hasn't armed communist nations since World War II, and that was to help Stalin fend off the Nazis, right? So it's kind of big that we're about to arm a communist nation. In a more modern perspective, we have to understand that they are driven by a common goal, and that's to thwart the rise of China, particularly China's dominance of the South China Sea.
Right. So this is as much a business deal with between Vietnam and the United States as it is kind of a geopolitical statement aimed at China.
Right. Well, Vietnam thinks that what's called the South China Sea, that they have dibs on that they have ownership of it. China regards the entire sea as, its own aquatic backyard. And the U.S. would like to make sure that China doesn't dominate this really important waterway. So when Vietnam is thinking about defending itself, and that's what Obama said that the U.S. was there to do, to help Vietnam defend itself, well, defend itself against who? I think the answer is China.
And yet President Obama kind of went out of his way to say this was not directed at anyone. What do you think that was about?
I think Obama has to make the right diplomatic noises. They don't want to exacerbate the very real tensions that are happening between the U.S. and Vietnam and between Vietnam and China. China, to its credit, didn't blow its top. A Chinese official came out and said, well, the ban was based on an ideological factor stemming to the Cold War. That's over. So it does make sense that they would lift the ban. But, moving down the road in the future, I think this is going to heighten tensions for sure.
Are you surprised Beijing didn't react more strongly?
I mean, to be honest, yeah, I am. Beijing puts out these state-run papers that have written really, really extreme op-eds about the U.S. coming into the South China Sea and propping up Vietnam and the Philippines to help thwart its rise. And they've referred to these countries as, little mosquitoes that the U.S. is riling up, and how this is, going to end tragically, and even hinted at conflict. So I'll be looking out for those op-eds in the future. But today they made very conciliatory gestures towards the U.S. and Vietnam and said, okay, we get it. No big deal.
I know Human Rights Watch is not happy about the deal. Tell us why.
Yeah, Human Rights Watch thinks that the U.S. gave Vietnam a gift with nothing in return. Human Rights Watch and other human rights groups has their eye on political prisoners in Vietnam. It's still a very authoritarian state, even if it's not so much a communist state. There are lots of human rights abuses that happen in Vietnam, and they thought that the U.S. should wait until they resolve those abuses. But let's keep in mind all of the other countries, including, say, Saudi Arabia, that the U.S. arms, that do not have great human rights records either.
President Obama said each arms deal would be scrutinized carefully with human rights in mind, but I guess for Human Rights Watch and other critics, that's not enough of a check?
I don't think so. And let's get a reality check here. U.S. weapons are